What's up, Barnhill family, and welcome back to your home for all things combat sports.
Yo.
Guys, we have a fantastic episode coming your way today. We are breaking down the record-breaking UFC Serbia event. Uros Medic, 30 seconds was all it took to dismantle D-Rod. We're going to get into that and what's next for him. Usman Nurmagomedov also had a big win over the weekend, and he's also out of his PFL contract, so we'll talk about what his future might hold and whether or not that looks like he might be a UFC fighter. Also, Arman Tsarukyan versus Charles Oliveira is being speculated by a lot of credible media sources, some saying that it's even confirmed. We've got Josh Van versus Pantoja at 331 supposedly on the same card, and we have our Noche UFC main event, which is Jean Silva versus Yair Rodriguez. And of course, we couldn't wrap the video without talking about the incredible performance that William Zepeda put on against Lamont Roach Jr. last night. Everything in the timestamps below, so if there's a particular topic that you're most interested in hearing about, you'll know where to find it. But we, Nick, are starting with UFC Serbia.
Right.
The record, I believe they hold the record now for the most first-round finishes in UFC history. Unbelievable card. I mean, from Stephanie Luciano, right? Opening up the card, lighter weight, women's weight classes, submission in the first round. Jovan Leka immediately after that, finish in the first round. And then boom, boom. I think there was only one decision on the prelims, and it was the bantamweight fight. And then you get into the main card, and you have the upset with Gilbert Urbina knocking out Vlasto Chepo, the hometown guy that a lot of people thought was going to be kind of a big deal. But all of that kind of got overshadowed by the unbelievable performance that Uros Medic put on last night against the returning Daniel Rodriguez. Now, I know Daniel's been in jail for the better part of the last year, but when you're given an assignment, it's harder to ace the test any better than Medic did last night.
Yeah, Uros Medic is so talented. I was really looking forward to breaking down his fight on the technical side. He only gave us 30 seconds, but what I will say about him is he hit home runs every opportunity he got. Of course, the 30-second knockout over a grizzled vet like D-Rod, whether he was in prison or not, that's irrelevant because that's a bad dude standing across the cage. Took him 30 seconds and a handful of punches to put his lights out. That plus his walkout was epic, plus his time on the microphone, not just in the cage with his call-outs. You know, he called out Carlos Prates. He had a couple other names on the tip of his tongue.
Leon Edwards. Yeah.
Leon Edwards, the former champ, great call. And then he went over to the commentary desk with Michael Chiesa and them, and he hit another home run. You know, everybody was starting to say like, oh man, we might be a bit worried with this microphone in front of us because he's so good, not even in his first language, at, you know, calling fights and talking on the microphone. So I just can't say enough good things about Uros. I'm a little bummed we don't get more technical stuff to break down, but what I will say is he's got real power in his hands. He knows how to find his targets, and he doesn't waste a single second in that octagon. As we always say, you don't get paid by the hour in this sport, and he's making sure that when you go out there, it's not going to be a long night for you if you're signed to fight Uros Medic. So I think what we're seeing out of him is nothing short of a guy basically setting himself to launch into superstardom. Great on the microphone, really awesome fight style, very technical. Obviously, he's going to be good everywhere the fight can go, but if you can get guys like Daniel Rodriguez out of there in the first minute of the fight, in the first 30 seconds, you're talking about something that the UFC can really get behind and market. So I think Uros Medic, as long as he keeps doing what he's doing and making the improvements that he's making, not only will he be a thorn in the side for everybody at 170, which, by the way, I don't have to remind you, is the most stacked division in the UFC, and he's shining brighter than almost everybody in it. But he's going to wind up bumping right into a title shot in like one or two more fights. So his climb up the division, even though it's so stacked, is something that is basically inevitable. Now, do you think the UFC is going to push him and try to get him active very soon, maybe get him in there before 2026 ends, or are they going to let him enjoy the rest of the year and bring him back sometime next year? Because I would honestly say after 30 seconds and a flawless performance from the start of the night to the end of the night, it would be beneficial for him to strike while the iron's hot and stay in people's minds and get back active again against another top prospect or top contender at 170.
Well, I do think they get him back in there before the end of 26. At least they make him a fight offer for sure. And I think it's going to be Leon Edwards. You know, one thing that I loved about Uros Medic, and you talked about how he just was hitting on the microphone, even since he's been in the UFC, his English has gotten astronomically better. And he's speaking and articulating like a professional commentator,
right,
in a language that's not his first language. When I was listening to him talk with Michael Chiesa and explain the nuances of Islam Makhachev's game, why that's a difficult matchup for Ian Gary, you know, he talked about his time in Alaska, what it felt like to come home to Serbia and the emotions that he was feeling, like the way he can talk about a certain fighter's fighting style and why the rankings are important and why he called out Prates because that's a fun fight, but realistically this is the better matchup given where he's going to be in the rankings. And I mean, just I can't say enough good things about how impressed I was. But then when you couple that with the fact that he's now on a 5-fight knockout streak, first round, by the way, as well. So a 5-fight win streak in the UFC, incredibly difficult to come by.
Right.
5-fight finish streak, even more difficult. All those finishes happening by knockout, even more so. And then all of them happening in the first round by knockout is epic. This guy is the exact fighter that the UFC, I mean, there's a reason that they opened up a new market, right?
Yeah.
The UFC's only been to, I think, 33 countries, the 33rd being Serbia.
Okay.
They don't open up a new market, especially a smaller country, right?
Yeah.
Like, obviously, you have your Chinas, your Japans, Brazil, France, like they want to do all that stuff, and they do all that stuff. But to open up a smaller European country, you have to have a special fighter or a special stable of fighters. And there's only 7 Serbians on the entire roster. So for them to build a card there and put every single Serbian on the UFC's roster on that card, and then have it headlined and built around Uros Medic is a clear window into what the UFC thinks about this young man. If he knocks out Leon Rocky Edwards and then gets a former champion on his resume, he will be fighting for a #1 contenders fight thereafter.
Yeah, and he let us in a little bit on to what he wants for his path moving forward. He wants the former champion in Leon Edwards, and then he wants another former champion. So there's only a couple of them floating in the top 5, top 6 or 7. So I do think that he's going to be calling his shots moving forward. And I also love how real Uros Medic is, because he said, I don't see any path to victory for Ian Gary. Of course, he's long and rangy. He knows how to stay behind his jab, and he's pretty good at chopping the legs and kicking and staying at distance. But Islam Makhachev is going to close that distance, and I don't think Ian Gary has the skills to deal with him on the ground. As a matter of fact, I don't have the skills to deal with him on the ground. So when you can see a guy be that real, again, another version of that is when he said, I'd love to fight Carlos Prates, but I understand that's not going to happen yet. I guess he just wanted to let us know as to is stylistically what fight he likes the best. And I love that he keeps up with the division, right? We talk about it sometimes how fighters don't keep up with their division or keep up with the sport. They're like, I don't want it in my algorithm. I don't tune into the fights. I think that's a big miss. Uros Medic has his finger on the pulse, not only for the UFC, but specifically his division. He knows who the top contenders are. He knows stylistically which ones he pairs up best against. He knows just how damn good Islam Makhachev is. And for him to just be as candid and real and raw with the commentary team as he was, speaks volumes to his intelligence and his understanding of the game and how the business side of the UFC works. But I do love his matchup with Rocky Edwards. He said, if you want to dig yourself out of the hole that you've put yourself in,
hiding in.
Yeah, you've been hiding. Yeah, basically Leon Edwards needs a win, and he's not going to get that against Uros Medic. But I think it was a good call out because Leon's got his back against the wall, and at the end of the day, even though he's not looking great, he is a former champion, so that'd be good to add to Uros Medic's resume. But I just think that his ability to understand the sport and his ability to understand how he needs to climb the rankings is something that is overlooked and actually undervalued in a lot of ways as far as UFC fighters go. Like some guys, when they get on a microphone, they don't care who they fight next, right? The one question every winner gets after every single fight is, great job, congratulations on your win, what's next? And thank God he had not one but 2 names ready to go. So one for immediate future in Leon Edwards, and one that he picked a fight with later on down the road, which would be an epic fight in Carlos Prates. There's not a person that watches the UFC that wouldn't want to see Uros Medic versus Carlos Prates. The only thing that makes that better is if somehow we can get it for a title on the line, because if Prates somehow gets that belt and we can get the striker's delight of Uros versus Prates for the 170 title, you're talking about a generational fight.
Well, I mean, 18 months from now, that's not an outrageous thing to think could happen. Like, Islam Makhachev will probably be retired in a year and a half. He's going to come back. He's going to fight Ian Gary. maybe he does one or two more, but there's really not much left for Islam. If he beats Ian Gary, let's say Shavkat comes back, gets a couple of wins.
Sure.
He's able to defeat Shavkat. Maybe you do a Prates or a Morales type of situation. Now, I know a lot of people like Amasov, but I think by the time Amasov makes his way up the rankings, Islam will more than likely be gone. So it's going to be interesting to see what shakes out. But Prates versus Medic for the belt is one, I think that stylistically might be, as I'm sitting here trying to think, is there a fight I'd be more excited if they announced? I don't know, because I love striking and I love high-level strikers and great finishers. That may be the most fun fight that the UFC could put on, given their current roster.
Yeah, before last night in Serbia, I was thinking Carlos Prates versus Michael Morales is the #1 fight I want to see stylistically at 170. Now I'm thinking Uros Medic versus Carlos Prates is 100%. Actually even more exciting. But one thing I have to bring up, because I think he's so smart to say this. He said, look, Islam Makhachev is the pound-for-pound best fighter in the world. We all know that, and we understand there's probably nobody at 170 that can beat him, but there is one thing, or one person, if you will, that's undefeated, and that's Father Time. And he said Father Time is going to show up sooner or later, and if Islam doesn't retire before Father Time shows up, who I'll remind you is undefeated, then somebody's going to come up and take his, epic reign that he's been on and his win streak away from him. And one thing I love that he said is, and by the way, he has been knocked out before, and he's shown that he struggles with southpaws. Look at who just won the main event here in Serbia, a pretty prolific striker and a southpaw at that, in myself, Uros Medic. So I think he is laying the foundation perfectly, not only to be a big star in the sport, but to be a world champion.
Yeah, I literally could not be hotter on Uros Medic after last night.
Yeah.
So you mentioned Father Time. I think that's a great move into the co-main event, because Father Time has shown up in a big way for Jan Blachowicz, unfortunately.
Yeah.
I love Jan. I was down for the famous Polish power. He was just this cool, grizzled guy from Poland.
And he opened everybody's eyes when he beat Israel Adesanya.
He was a big underdog in that fight. A lot of people thought Izzy was going to walk through him and become a champ. And Jan was like, nope, I'm going to beat him on the feet. I'm going to land the bigger shots, and I'm going to out-grapple him, and I'm going to use that full gamut of my mixed martial arts game to defeat who Izzy at the time was one of the hottest one of the hottest champions in all of the sport. And so, here's kind of where I'm at with it, right? Maybe I was mistaken, right? Because I wasn't 100% sold on Navajo Stirling.
Okay.
The biggest win he had, prior to last night was a knockout win of Ion Cutelaba, but Ion tends to get a little spazzy in there, a little reckless at times, and he gets caught. But Jan Blachowicz, even though he's 43, we were talking last night on the live stream, I looked at his record from the time he was 40 and on, right? I'm not talking about under 40. I'm talking about after the 40th birthday, who's he fought, so you got a split decision with Alex Pereira.
Yep.
You've got a draw with Bogdan Guskov. I can't remember if the Ankalaev draw he was either 39 or 40, but suffice it to say he was, sufficiently old. And then he's got a lost decision, albeit, to City Kickboxing's other competitor in Carlos Ulberg. And then when you couple that together with the fact that, and again, that's all past prime Jan. I'm not talking about, 37-year-old Jan Blachowicz. I'm talking about plus 40-year-old Jan. Now, when you take Navajo Stirling, knocking him out in the first round viciously, and then you think to yourself, okay, a lot of people thought that, 2-3 years ago, Jan Blachowicz beat Alex Pereira. Mm-hmm. He went decision with Carlos. He did a draw with Magomed and Bogdan. Like, these are big names. These are people that are headlining events, champions, people competing for double champ status in Alex. And, and then just look at what Navajo did, dismantling him in the first round. I actually have kind of turned the corner on Stirling. I think I'm fully on the bandwagon at this point.
Yeah, and Jan Blachowicz, look, 43 years old is very old. But at 205, you can give him a little bit of grace, because the heavier you go up in weight classes, the later into their years the prime can basically be open.
I think Glover in the weight class. I think he won the belt at like 42.
Exactly. So Navajo Stirling obviously caught him at the right time, but you still can't deny that strength of schedule. Jan Blachowicz, most all the fights that you just named were 5-round fights. and every one of them was either a draw or a decision, right?
Yeah.
So he's going through 25-minute wars. And while Navajo Stirling maybe wouldn't have beaten him 4 or 5 years ago, that's not the guy that he was drawn in to fight. So he had to fight the best Jan Blachowicz that could show up. And unfortunately, Father Time came in and said, your time here is done. I hope Jan Blachowicz can have a few more fights and ease himself out of the rankings and stuff like that. But realistically, that was way too much for him. And Navajo Stirling did have to get through the test because Jan is a crafty veteran. As you always say, and many other people in this space say, the last thing to go is your power. But one thing that also sticks around with these guys who are championship caliber fighters is their fight IQ and that grizzled veteran experience. They've always got a couple tricks up their sleeve. And sometimes the newer guy, especially one who's never tasted defeat like Navajo Stirling, they might not be privy to some of these little things. And then you get in there with some former champion, some guy who's been around the block so many times like Jan Blachowicz, and they'll show you a couple things. Jan had nothing for Navajo, unfortunately. And Navajo is definitely as good as advertised. City Kickboxing has a firm grasp now on the 205 division because Carlos Ulberg, he sits in the driver's seat as the champion, but they've got one of the hottest rising contenders now in Navajo Stirling, and I don't see very much difficulty for him through that top 10. I think Khalil Roundtree is a great matchup.
Those
for
are
him.
the two call-outs he had.
Paulo Costa, he made the right calls, and I think Costa's a little bit closer. We saw Yuri come out and say that he has an agreement to fight Costa, and if Costa is going to keep mentioning his name, either sign the contract or stop talking about me. So I have a feeling Costa is going to be taken care of. But Khalil Roundtree did just back out of a fight with Ankalaev, so he's probably going to be looking to get active again. I would assume that he and Navajo both want to fight before 2026 ends, so that's a perfect fight to be made. And now you insert yourself with a former title contender in Khalil Roundtree, who's also a great striker. Now you're talking about putting him right into meaningful conversations for contendership. Now it gets a little bit interesting, right? If Ulberg is able to defend his belt once he comes back from his knee injury and he's able to, get back to defending his belt and running the division as a champ should, what are you going to do, right? Because we just saw Israel Adesanya leave City Kickboxing, but he was also live streaming and very happy for his friend Navajo Stirling. So I don't think that even though him and Carlos Ulberg may have beef and maybe he left City Kickboxing for personal reasons, that he's just a F City Kickboxing and everybody who exists over there. He's still a guy who loves those guys, spent years on the mats with them, trained with them, and he's happy to see his friend and longtime training partner, Navajo Stirling, have success at 205, because I think if he can continue doing what he's doing, he's making the right call-outs. He's now, 11-0? So he's sitting in a very
10 or
good
11
spot. Yeah, he's sitting in a great spot to make a real title run. Alex Pereira's out of the division, right? So you're going to run into the top of the division very soon. I think Navajo Stirling hit a home run. Not quite as far out of the park as Uros Medic, but damn close.
Yeah, I mean, so it's amazing if he does fight again before the end of the year and does win again against somebody like a Khalil Roundtree. I think Navajo Stirling is probably your prospect of the year, right? Because this is a guy that was kind of outside of the top 10. The diehards knew who he was. City Kickboxing's got this young man, 26, 27 years old, kind of coming up and coming into his own. But then to, have, 3 or 4 wins in a calendar year, have a former champion now under his belt in the form of a first-round knockout. If he could beat Khalil, that's how it's almost like a Joshua Van, right? You come into the UFC, you win one, you lose one, but then all of a sudden you're given opportunities and you just say, yes, yes, yes. Navajo Stirling fought not that long ago.
Right.
He was given a short notice opportunity. He said yes, he made the most of it. And as we see with Van, when you say yes enough times and you show up and perform enough times, you can go in a very tiny period of time, like a small window of time, from being outside the top 15 to contending for a belt or being in a number one contenders fight, or in Josh's case, actually being the undisputed champion. So I think Navajo Stirling's activity and quick turnarounds are exactly what he needs to continue to do. I think 2026 is proving to be a breakout year for him. I think you get him in there with Khalil Roundtree before the end of the year. It's a tough-ass fight, but he does have a style that can beat Khalil. He's got to be careful. But, I think if he can get past that, 2027 would have him set up for a potential title run, as crazy as that sounds.
Yeah, and then maybe he winds up running into the winner of Yuri versus Costa if we do end up seeing that fight get made. But yeah, I just think with the landscape that we've got at 205 right now, Navajo Stirling with 1 or 2 more wins could bump himself right into a title shot. The only thing that would slow him down is if his teammate Carlos Ulberg is still the champion, unless they don't have any issues fighting one another, which that could wind up being a very fun fight. You know, they're both really good on the feet. They're great with their striking. Carlos Ulberg is obviously the champ, so I would have to favor him a little bit right now. But if we see him dismantle Khalil Roundtree, then Navajo Stirling could wind up being very close as far as the lines are concerned to become the champion against his friend and teammate.
Yeah, you know, that would be crazy to see him against Ulberg, and maybe City Kickboxing gets, you know, fractured even more at that point in time. But not a bad place for a gym to be, to have the champion and one of the hottest prospects. But
for sure.
I want to move into now, before we get into the PFL stuff, just my biggest W of the night besides Uros Medic and Navajo Stirling, but I want to give a shout out to somebody that fought on the prelims, Michael Oliveira.
Beast.
This guy's an absolute monster. Yeah. And we could spend an hour talking about everybody that won on the card: Jovan Leka, Stephanie Luciano. I mean, the list goes on and on. Even Gilbert Urbina having that fantastic win as a big underdog. But I want to just hit on Michael because I think we may be seeing a star in the making here.
Yeah.
This guy looks the part. He's got the military background, shows up in the military hat for the weigh-ins.
Gangster.
Absolute, you know, chiseled out of stone as far as his physical appearance, knocking folks down with a jab, finishing beautifully, taking his time, really high fight IQ on the feet, really beautiful reads that I was seeing out of him. I think Michael Oliveira is a massive problem. And I think John Anik said in either right before or the knockout or right after the knockout had happened that, dare I even say, we might be seeing the biggest star out of Brazil since like an Alex Pereira.
Yeah, I mean, John Anik is the legend on the microphone. He's as good on the microphone as Michael Oliveira appears to be in the octagon. And he said, I'm going to paraphrase, but he said, not to be hyperbolic, but we could be seeing the next superstar out of Brazil in Michael Oliveira. I really do think that he's got some wheels to that. You know, Michael Oliveira looks like this force of nature. Like, he is not somebody you want to be messing with. He's one of the scariest dudes on the roster. Just the way he looks, the stoicism, everything he's got. I'm really interested to see how he's able to take this undefeated record and keep running with it. One jab to sit down a guy like Oban Elliott, who, by the way, Oban Elliott is a great fighter. Yeah. He's good everywhere the fight can go, and he knew he was up against it in this Oliveira fight, fighting an undefeated prospect who a lot of people said was the top rising star out of the Contender Series from last year. And he came out, he was ready to go. He threw a couple overhands and he wound up finding the target a couple times, but they didn't even phase Oliveira. He was just walking right through him. And then, of course, when he found his moments to score his shots, it only took a couple of them. Every time he landed flush on Oban Elliott, whether it was a jab or a clean two, he was putting him on the canvas. So I think this guy's power is very real. I think that the 170 division just added another one to the crop of already insane ranked fighters. I guess he's not even ranked yet.
No.
And he probably won't be ranked after this weekend, but needless to say, he's a top 15 talent in the UFC's welterweight division right now. So I'm excited to see his future. I think that John Anik is right in saying that we might just have the next superstar out of Brazil, and I can't wait to see what they do next for him. But all I want to see is that they get him in there active again soon, because I think meaningful fights for him are just on the horizon.
Yeah, and they probably will give him a top 15 matchup next, because he showed that he's top 15 caliber. Oban Elliott's a guy that's just kind of right outside that top 15. And like you said, he's a good grappler. He's good with his striking. He can win a fight in anywhere where it goes. And he had nothing for this young man, Oliveira. So congrats to him. Let's move into PFL now. So,
this was juicy.
Juicy indeed. And Usman Nurmagomedov absolutely dismantling Archie Coughlin last night, who was also, by the way, I will remind you, an undefeated fighter coming into that fight at 13-0, I think it was.
With a great team, too, right? He had a pretty damn good corner. Not quite as good as Usman's corner, but
his corner was stacked.
Second best, yeah.
So okay, so let's break a few things down, right?
Okay.
And this is, I think, a big misconception with the Dagestani fighters. The new age Dagestani fighters, at least. Usman Nurmagomedov has more knockout wins than he has submissions, and he has more submissions than he has decisions. So he's not this decision merchant that a lot of people think the Dagestani fighters are. He's a prolific striker. He's a fantastic grappler. And yes, if the fight goes decision, he can beat you there as well, and he can eke out a close one if he needs to. But I think the bigger story here is he's now out of his PFL contract. And before the belt was even put on him, the negotiations began. You know, Khabib getting the belt from Jake Paul, putting it on him, and then Jake saying, look, if you perform well in your next performance, I'll buy you a car.
Big mistake.
He said, who knows what the next performance is going to be? I'm talking about tonight. I'm talking about this performance. Where's my bonus? And he said, this guy likes to talk a lot of trash about the UFC not paying fighters. So let's see now when we come to the negotiating table what they're willing to pay me. And then, of course, Dana White was asked at the press conference after Serbia last night, Usman Nurmagomedov is now a free agent. Are you interested in signing him? And the smirk on Dana's face said it all. And Dana White would love nothing more than the week after the PFL and MVP do their big announcement, the biggest piece of news outside of the UFC.
Their biggest event of the year.
Their biggest event of the year. And the biggest piece of news, the merger of MVP and PFL, probably, outside of UFC news, that's the biggest MMA news that's come out in the last year or so.
Sure.
And Dana would love, on the heels of that, to take their biggest star and sign him to the UFC. That's the kind of stuff that Dana likes to do. He talks about playing with babies, and these guys are like kids to him compared to he's competing with the NFL and the NBA, and so you know how Dana gets going. And so I think that the war for Usman Nurmagomedov has officially begun. I think that Usman Nurmagomedov understands that even if the PFL offers him more money than the UFC offers him on a per fight contract, the opportunity is so much more vast in the UFC. Ali Abdelaziz is the manager of Usman Nurmagomedov as he is the manager of Justin Gaethje. And he tweeted almost immediately after UFC Freedom 250 that based off of that win, I just secured Justin Gaethje a $3.5 million endorsement deal, completely separate from his fighting contract. So those types of deals don't go around to PFL fighters. Islam Makhachev, his number one training partner, same weight. Well, now Islam's at 170. But Islam's got 14 million, followers on Instagram. Usman has just over 1 million. So the reach when you're a UFC fighter, and I think Usman could be contending for or potentially win UFC belts, the opportunities and the things that open up to you, even if he's getting paid less per fight, it's going to be difficult for the PFL to compete with that when they come to the negotiating table, in my opinion.
Yeah, and Jake Paul's coming out party for being the MVP promoter, or the modern MVP, because
the Dana White of MVP promotions. Yeah,
it was a big swing and an even bigger miss, right? So Usman Nurmagomedov obviously did a perfect job in getting in the cage and dismantling an undefeated fighter. And then, of course, we all knew that was his last fight on the contract, so we want to find out how much Jake Paul is really willing to get into supporting these fighters. He says, I'm all about paying the fighters more money. The UFC is not paying them the right money. All the stuff. We know the beef between Dana and Jake. It's alive and well, and it's going to go nowhere for a meaningful period of time, especially because Jake has now partnered up with Eddie Hearn. But Usman Nurmagomedov, man, I really think that if a guy like Kai Asakura, who was able to come into the UFC and get an immediate title shot, right?
Yep.
Is able to do that, then of course somebody like Usman Nurmagomedov can come in and get an immediate title shot. And I agree, when fighters are getting paid less money in the UFC than maybe Jake Paul is willing to pay for single fights in the PFL or MVP, it may be more incentivized to stay with the PFL if your main focus is money. Now, Usman said, look, legacy is great, but it doesn't pay my bills, so I need the money. Dana White can have his cake and eat it too, essentially, by bringing Usman in and putting him immediately in a title shot. Or even if he doesn't do that, put him in a number one contenders matchup, because once you become the champion in the UFC, nobody in the PFL is making the money that champions in the UFC are making.
No.
And Usman Nurmagomedov is a better prospect than Akai Asakura. He's a better prospect than some of the guys we've seen come over and jump right into very meaningful fights.
Like even Yuri, I think, was like, what was it, 2 fights and then a title fight? Or was it 1 and then a title fight?
I think it was 1, maybe 2, but Brock Lesnar, same thing. He didn't have to fight very many times before he got to a title.
The precedent is set. Suffice it to say that a newcomer to the UFC can fight in a title fight in their first fight, or can fight in a number 1 contenders match. And I think that's the minimum that Usman would, the minimum he would get is a number 1 contenders match, just because 155 has so many talents, and we don't know what's going to happen with Arman, with Ilya, if Justin's going to retire. Patty just looked really good. So there's a lot of moving parts, whereas at 125 with Kai Asakura, a little bit of a different story. So, but the absolute outside worst case scenario for Usman would be that he's in a number 1 contenders match in his first fight.
Yeah, and even if Dana White offers him less money than the PFL or Jake Paul's willing to offer, which I doubt will be the case, but even if he is, then you just incentivize him by saying, Usman, we're going to give you a title shot for your very first fight. So if you win that, all of a sudden you're now getting what the champions in the UFC are making, which is significantly more than what anybody, champion or not, in the PFL is making. And not to even put Usman Nurmagomedov and CM Punk in the same realm.
How dare you?
They're not anywhere close to one another. But CM Punk didn't come over to the UFC for a 10-10 contract.
No.
He came over for a very big one. And I get that he came from WWE. He has his own fan base, whatever. It's not fight fans. Usman Nurmagomedov is the type of guy where you can give him a significantly bigger contract for his UFC debut than most guys coming from the regional scene. So I think Dana White is absolutely going to look to stick it to Jake Paul one good time. Hell, if you're willing to re-sign Robelis Despaigne after what he did in the UFC,
just to take Francis's next opponent off the table,
for the sole purpose of giving Francis nobody to fight except for maybe a rematch with Philippe Lins, which nobody wants to see.
Make no mistake, that was why that happened, by the way. It wasn't 100%. Like the heavyweight division is not great, but it's getting better. I mean, there's even with last night, Jovan Leka and Serbia, there's some young talent that's coming up, Gable Stevenson. The heavyweight division is starting to take hold a little bit.
Yeah.
They didn't need Robelis Despaigne. That was I'm going to piss you off move from Dana White to PFL and MVP, and said, you know what? This was your next guy for Francis Ngannou. I'm taking him off the table. Yeah. That was all that was, and you won't convince me otherwise.
Yeah, well, and if you look back at history, right, a lot of people have an issue with the fighter pay in the UFC. And if you're like me, I've trained with many guys who come into the UFC on a 10-10 contract, and, now it's like, 12-12. But if you're talking to Usman Nurmagomedov, he is sharing the mats with Khabib Nurmagomedov, Islam Makhachev, Umar, all these guys. And while, there are a lot of people who can, be upset about the fighter pay, that group of guys ain't the ones, because they have made tens of millions of dollars through working with the UFC, not only getting their legacy, which they admire the most, it seems, but also getting their pockets lined. And Usman Nurmagomedov came out right off the bat and was willing to go to bat for Dana White in the UFC right there while he's standing face to face in front of a microphone with Jake Paul. He's like, you talk a lot about Dana White not paying. Let's see you put your money where your mouth is. And I think it rubbed Jake the wrong way. Now, I'm not willing to say like Khabib stole the belt from Jake, because I couldn't really tell. It did look like Jake was holding on to it for dear life. And
Jake says Khabib asked for the belt. Like he says that was like a agreed upon thing.
And that's what they do, right? Khabib is always the one. He wraps it around Islam, right? That's just how they do it. If Umar would have won, you remember when Merab and Umar fought, and Khabib was standing there like, I know the ticket right here says that Merab won the fight, but give me that belt because it belongs to Umar. So they do that. It's nothing new. I don't think that Jake Paul was like trying to fight Khabib for it, which, by the way, he would have
wouldn't be much of a fight.
Yeah, there's not much of a fight there, but I think that Khabib wanting to do that and taking that little moment there was good, because it does show that Usman and the entire Nurmagomedov team still holds Dana White in the UFC in the highest regard possible. And while, yes, money is very important for prize fighters, legacy also comes as a close second, especially to these Dagestani fighters. They really, everybody's heard the rumors. Oh, Khabib and Conor are both getting offered $100 million to run it back one time in the Middle East. And Khabib's like, I have no interest in doing that. So he's not driven exclusively by money. And what Khabib says is what Abdul Manap said. And what those guys say trickles down to the guys in the practice room, and all of them kind of operate under the same guidelines. So Usman Nurmagomedov is going to wind up in the UFC. He's going to wind up in title fights. And I really think the 155 division needs a guy like Usman, because Khabib came and he was the trailblazer for the Dagestanis in not only in the UFC, but particularly in the 155 division. And then Islam came and carried the torch as long as he could. He can no longer make that weight. It just feels like the 155 division in the UFC is missing something without having a dominant, undefeated Dagestani fighter running the division and controlling it. So I think we're going to see him move over and take over the reins away from the guys like Paddy, Ilya, Arman Tsarukyan, Max Holloway, Charles Oliveira. And by the way, all of those fights are very interesting. If they said Usman Nurmagomedov is officially in the UFC and his first fight's against Ilya Topuria, everybody's going to be like, oh my God, this is an awesome fight.
Paddy Pimblett, Arman Tsarukyan, Charles Oliveira. I mean, you could throw Usman's name in there with any of those people, and we're all like, wow.
Yeah.
Like,
and
that's a big boy fight.
Yeah. So I think Usman sees that. And you pair yourself up with those guys, right? They're all, I mean, as big of stars as the PFL is as an entire organization, right? One fight with Arman Tsarukyan, who is on this generational run, it puts Usman Nurmagomedov way up there in the queue as far as meaningful stars in the sport of mixed martial arts, which he currently is not. And I think a guy with his skill set deserves to be fighting the best fighters in the world, in there with the guys that are superstars that can draw the most attention. And I think as long as he keeps showing up and winning, not only will he, obviously he's got the PFL belt in his office, but he probably wants to add that UFC belt. And if we can get him in there with some of these massive names that we're talking about, you're talking about a real chance for him to then join Khabib and Islam up in that greatest of all time type of conversation.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, I think the percentage, if you wanted me to just slap a percentage on it, I would say 95+% chance that Usman Nurmagomedov's next fight will be inside the UFC. There's just too much that the UFC can offer him. Like I said, that even if the pay was lower per fight, the opportunity is greater. His brother's over there. His main training partner's over there. His mentor in Khabib built his whole career over there. Abdulmanap, when he was alive, was very, very plugged in. His manager, Ali, may be the most plugged in manager with, all of the UFC brass, Hunter, Sean, Mick, all those guys, Dana. So I really believe that the writing is on the wall, that we're going to see him in the UFC next. And I think that's a perfect segue, because somebody who he might be fighting at some point down the line is Mr. Arman Tsarukyan.
Oh, yeah.
And he had a grappling match last night against a fitness influencer from India named Ankit Bayanporia, and I apologize if I mispronounced his last name.
You're way better with names than I am, my friend.
But, this guy was way outclassed, right?
Yeah.
I mean, he was physically in good shape, and I had read that he did a little wrestling in his life, and India's obviously... It's not a hotbed for mixed martial arts or martial arts of any kind. And this guy showed up and he did the best he could, but Arman dominated him. It was, the odds were just obscene on that one. And so it's not so much, there's not really much to break down, right, on the fight itself. It was a domination for Tsarukyan, which we all expected it would be.
A couple good takedowns, a suplex, a couple of fun
and
little
then an
exchanges.
armbar finish, and he could have finished him earlier, but he kind of like transitioned a little bit and had some fun. But he wants Dillon Danis next in submission only. So that's interesting to me, because Dillon's a submission ace.
Yeah.
Arman's a way better wrestler, way better all-around fighter. But Dillon in a submission only, a little bit of a challenge. And then also on top of that, there's a lot of credible media sources, especially out of Brazil right now, that are saying that Charles Oliveira versus Arman Tsarukyan is official for UFC 331 in Los Angeles. Now, we know the Armenian community is massive there.
Yeah.
I am hearing that the BMF belt is not on the line, which is interesting. But, I won't say that it's official yet, but I will say that where there's smoke, there's fire. And I am seeing some journalists out of Brazil whose names I recognize starting to say that, this fight is confirmed. They're just waiting to announce it. So it's worth talking about. But it seems like we're probably going to get Arman back in the UFC almost a year after he beat Dan Hooker, and it looks like the opponent is going to be his old foe, Charles Oliveira, who had a very close fight with him. What were your thoughts on the grappling match, the potential Charles fight, and then, of course, the Dillon Danis deal?
Yeah, so I thought that Arman is always just down to entertain the crowd, right? And this wasn't an overly competitive match. It was a guy with like 12 or 13 million followers, but in a region of the world that is underrepresented in MMA. And I think the Indian fans love the sport. They love Arman Tsarukyan. They were happy to see their guy just get the opportunity. So when I see Arman Tsarukyan doing these kinds of things, I think that he is the guy that has the best chance to not touch Conor McGregor's level of stardom, but be the next biggest star out of the UFC, because he's tapping into markets that nobody else has ever tapped into, right? Think about Ilia Topuria, right? He's sort of the spokesperson now for Spanish MMA.
Yeah.
And it's really blowing up over there in Spain. That he's got a promotion he's doing out there himself. But Spain is a big country for sure. It's not near as big as India. And so if you can start to get some attention from the 1 billion plus people that live over there, now you're talking about a whole different market that is relatively untapped. And I think Arman's smart to do that. I also do love that he called for the Dillon Danis match. Before I get into Charles, I want to get into that. So Arman versus Dillon Danis is so interesting to me. And Dillon Danis is very quick to make responses. He's one of those guys that can fire from the hip and somehow it just works every time. He was like, you're afraid to wrestle me. You're afraid to do a submission grappling match with me. By the way, I tapped out your best friend in Khamzat Chimaev, which, whether it was wrestling rules or not, it looked like he had Khamzat dead to rights in a guillotine choke. And Khamzat wasn't preparing to protect his neck because there are no submissions in wrestling. But Dillon Danis is the kind of guy that knows how to go viral.
He's the kind of guy that pulls guard in a boxing match.
Exactly. And all he needs to do is get the still shot of him holding Khamzat Chimaev in a guillotine lock, which looked like it was cinched up and could have cut the blood flow to Khamzat's brain if the fight didn't get broken up. Now, Arman versus Dillon's very interesting because we also got to see Arman grapple with Khamzat. I think it's been a couple of years now. It was like an outdoor octagon. They did it somewhere over there in the Middle East. It was a lot of fun to watch. But Arman,
I think it was on Yas Island. It was the Abu Dhabi setup there for Fight Island.
It could have been. Arman is a great grappler. And he held his own as well as you can against a big Khamzat Chimaev, but still Khamzat was able to get around and do what he needed to do. So I'm not willing to say that Dillon Danis is going to go out there and smoke Arman Tsarukyan, but I think that is a great opportunity for Hype Brazil to get themselves even further on the map. They should go ahead and make that fight as soon as possible. Just please don't make it before the Charles Oliveira fight with Arman Tsarukyan, because we need Arman back in the octagon.
Yeah, his next fight's got to be in the UFC.
Yeah.
Got to be. He's going to be almost a year. Like 331, when is that? So 330 is coming up here in a couple of weeks. That's August. So 331 will be September. If memory serves, it was October of 25 when he fought Dan Hooker. So that's 11 months. It's hard to, because Arman has been so active and he's been on all these streams and he's been with Nina and he's been building his fan base, it's easy to think that, man, Arman's so active, but he's really not in MMA. And his goal is the biggest thing that Arman can still do is not become the Hype Brazil champion. It's not become the RAF champion. It's to become the undisputed UFC champion of the world. That is the biggest accolade that Arman can go for right now. And him competing inside the UFC has to take priority. I love the year he's had. Yeah. I think he's had a fantastic run. One loss into Colby Covington, right?
Yeah. And about 11 or 12 matches of some kind.
Exactly. And so the guy's fighting at least once a month in some sort of fashion. But the next one, it's got to be, because Dillon Danis, he's great with his leg locks. Dillon Danis can heel hook you. He can tear your ACL. Yeah. I mean, imagine some weird scenario where Arman suffered an injury against Dillon Danis and then he was out for a year. Now you're talking about 2 years out of the octagon for the potentially the biggest star that the UFC could build right now.
At a prime age as well.
At his prime age. So we got to see him back in the octagon. Then we can do the Dillon stuff. We can have some fun. But I would even put a little bit of rules around that. The UFC used to do that back in the day. They were like, they have UFC BJJ now, but before they were like, we have problems with, our fighters getting leg locked by leg lock specialists and tearing ACLs. And then we've got to sideline a prospect and everything. So they were allowing their fighters to compete in jiu-jitsu outside of the octagon, but it was with the caveat that they had to put a clause in the contract that there was no leg locks. Yeah. So maybe we do something like that just to make sure, because Dillon is a, world-class level jiu-jitsu. Say what you will about Dillon Danis. He boxed Logan Paul. He's, always trying to go viral. A lot of people hate him for his antics, but if you strip all that away, he's a world-class jiu-jitsu fighter, and he has been that way for a long period of time. Now, is he as good as he once was? I don't know. I don't know how often Dillon's training jiu-jitsu, but he's a dangerous threat to anybody on a submission-only sort of rule set. So I think the UFC's got to be a little bit careful there, but I do love the matchup.
Yeah, and Arman did his time in timeout, right? The UFC gave him that title shot against Islam Makhachev. He backed out on about 24 hours notice, insert Renato Moicano, which was not a competitive title fight. And everybody was kind of frustrated with Arman. We're like, all right, this guy, we found out he's a billionaire's son. We don't want to see him. He got the title opportunity, and he threw it back in the UFC's face. And what he has done since then has 180 degrees changed everybody's perspective on Arman. Of course, he still has a few haters, but us over here at this channel and pretty much everybody that you can hear from are saying Arman Tsarukyan belongs in nothing else but world title fights. As a matter of fact, if he can't get the world title fight with Justin because of the schedule, then we need to see him in there with the BMF champion in Charles Oliveira, because he just needs to be a main event. He needs to be fighting for titles. Now, it's interesting because they're saying the BMF belt won't be on the line for this, but they're also saying that the co-main event will be a title fight between Josh Van and Pantoja, which means he is Arman Tsarukyan and Charles Oliveira, for that matter, are sitting in rare air where they're like Conor McGregor, where Conor McGregor just headlined a show and there was no belt on the line. But almost nobody in the UFC's history has ever been able to headline a numbered event and it not have a title on it. So if Arman and Charles are able to do that, then they're sitting in a really good spot. And I would have to lean towards that being more Arman's doing than Charles is doing. You know, the
UFC's not loving Charles after the Max deal, but
exactly.
Yeah. So it's weird to me that if they were to do that as a main event without the BMF belt on the line, and I get it, it's very traditional. History proves out that the flyweights are the co-main event. I mean, for whatever, whether you like that fact or you hate it, it is what it is. DJ, even on his massive, epic run, was the co-main event slot. Joshua Van, Pantoja, that's co-main event material.
And they have to stack the cards, too.
And they have to stack the cards. You're talking about LA, again, Armenian crowd and whatnot. But I think that if you are going to main event Arman and Charles, at least put something on it that makes it, for God's sake, don't do another 3 round, because there's so much debate about the first fight. Had it been 2 more rounds, Charles would have won, and yada yada. So do a 5-rounder, but if it's going to be the main event over Van and Pantoja, and it is kind of a slap in the face to Joshua Van and Alexandre Pantoja. If it's like, you know what, you guys are fighting for the undisputed. Joshua, you're one of the most exciting fighters that we've signed in the last 5 years. You're the youngest champion we have on our roster, but guess what? We're putting a non-title fight above you. At least, I mean, what an insult, right? At least put the BMF on the line so that the young men in Van and Pantoja, the small fellas, can feel at least somewhat okay with getting shafted, unless they are going to make that the main event. But I'm hearing the reports at least saying it's the co-main, so I don't know. Yeah,
and it just goes to show that the 125 belt on the line isn't as big as the 155 #1 contender being solidified, which is crazy. But I do think they should put the BMF on the line, because realistically, Charles Oliveira, the way he got the BMF belt, was not loved by the fans, right? It's not some sort of written rule where a BMF fight has to be this slobber knocker, fight of the night, insane type of showing from both men. Yes, you can go bend the rules a little bit, and it's sort of BMF for Charles Oliveira to go in there and pull the rug over everybody's eyes and say, I'm going to just grapple this guy down and make it a totally different style BMF fight. But I also get the pushback from the fans who were expecting the unwritten rules to be adhered to, and that just wasn't the case. So are they worried that if Arman gets it, he's going to get it largely from grappling? And now we've got 2 BMF fights in a row that are basically grappling matches. And now all the luster and all the enjoyment we get out of BMF fights is sort of gone. I don't know.
Or do they retire the BMF belt? That's another thing they could do too.
Move it around. Josh Hokett said he wants it. So if you're a real BMF, there shouldn't be weight classes. Josh Hokett wants the BMF. Maybe you just take it out of the division for a little while and move it somewhere else where you see fit, just like they did in the very beginning for the BMF. But I think they should put it on the line. I think it should be the main event over the Pantoja and Van fight. I think that would help bring a lot of eyes to the flyweights that need a little bit of help with pushing a card. But yeah, Arman versus Charles seems like it's all but made. We should be getting an announcement any day now, but all the speculation gives us enough meat on the bone to at least cover the topic and bring it up, that mini Armenia is considered like Glendale, or is it Glendale, California? Yeah. So everybody sees that as like, okay, if we put Arman over there, he's going to sell this arena out. And it makes a lot of sense. So I hope that's the fight. But moreover than Charles and Arman getting the fight, I hope the BMF is on the line. I think the belt needs to move around a little bit. And I like Arman Tsarukyan's chances at that. The only other reason I think they might be holding it is because they assume Arman's going to win this fight. I mean, history tells us that Arman beats Charles Oliveira because Arman beat Charles Oliveira. But we also don't like to see the BMF belt tied together with the undisputed. And if you ask a lot of people, Arman Tsarukyan's the best 155er in the world. He just doesn't have the belt yet. So if he winds up with the BMF, and then even though he deserves a title fight right now, it wins one more fight, now gets the BMF, and then moves into undisputed. Now you've tied the BMF belt directly to the undisputed, and then it gets a little bit messier there because now you can't really have a 13th belt where it can be contested separately from undisputed, and that's where it gets a little bit tricky. But I do think they got the right two guys. I think Charles deserves the Arman rematch, and I think that if Justin Gaethje's not available to fight Arman Tsarukyan this year and is still contemplating retirement, that you get Arman Tsarukyan active before an entire calendar year goes by and we don't see him back in the octagon.
Agreed 100%. And we also got the main event announcement for Noche UFC, Jean Silva, Yair Rodriguez.
Banger of a fight.
Quick thoughts on that one. I mean, a striker's delight.
Yeah.
Really high-level kicks out of Yair. John Silva just brings out intensity, punching power, tenacity, walking his opponents down. I think the stylistic matchup is fun. But here's I'm just going to give you my bigger picture, and then I'm going to hand it to you for your thoughts. But that all but tells me that Movsar versus Volk is going to be announced, right?
Yes.
Because a lot of people thought that Silva was the dark horse for like maybe because of fighting style and because he's so exciting and such a big potential star that they'll put him against Volk. But now that we have that chip off the table, Movsar versus Volkanovski does feel kind of inevitable. Of course, you could do Diego Lopez versus Volk 3.
Please, for the love of God,
just kidding.
no.
But I think Movsar versus Volk is all but announced based on the Noche announcement of last night.
Yeah, and Noche being a fight night, not a numbered event, is actually a good thing because they gave us the list of fights that are going to be on that card, and it's great for a fight night, but it's lacking seriously for a numbered event. Mm-hmm. And I think that adding Yair Rodriguez and John Silva is all they needed. Those two guys getting in there and mixing it up as two of the most prolific and exciting strikers that the featherweight division has ever seen is all the makings of just an epic fight. So we've got Brazil versus Brazil/Mexico, right? Because Diego Lopez, though he represents Oklahoma
John
now.
Silva, not Diego.
Yeah. I'm sorry, Don. Oh my gosh, you said Diego. Now I'm all confused.
I messed your head up.
No, you're good. Okay, so
Brazil versus Mexico.
Brazil versus Mexico. Yair is solely Mexican, right?
Yes, he is.
Okay, so still a great fight, regardless. Disregard everything I said. But Yair Rodriguez came up as one of the guys who was truly one of the most exciting strikers at 145, and of course he has not had the best few years, not had the most active few years, and John Silva has been rising faster than almost anybody in the division. As you said, even though he hasn't been on this crazy long win streak like Movsar, he was still kind of in the runnings and up in discussion for taking on Volkanovski next. Now Volkanovski came out and said, Movsar's the guy. I want to fight the best guys. I'm not going to be here all that much longer, but I do think we need to add a little bit of meritocracy into this thing, and Movsar's done everything y'all have asked and then some.
And Diego Lopez beat John Silva.
Yeah,
and
true.
Diego Lopez has been dismantled twice now by Volk. So, yeah, the hierarchy does make sense. It's got to be Movsar.
Yeah, and I had heard rumors of Yair moving up to 155. Maybe we'll see that one day, but I'm really glad 145 has John Silva and Yair Rodriguez. Not an easy fight for John Silva to win, but I do think there are paths to victory. Yair Rodriguez is such a good lateral mover. He really knows how to utilize those kicks and keep a guy with heavy hands away from him and away at range. So if Yair Rodriguez is able to do what we've seen him do many times in the past to John Silva, boom, now you've inserted a guy who we all thought would be a world champion at some point back into title talks. And maybe there's a case to be made that he could be the last title fight for Volkanovski. Or, if he
Volk dismantled him so badly in their fight that, that finishing sequence with Volk and Yair Rodriguez, to me, to date, is still one of the most high IQ
mixing of the martial arts.
Unbelievable. It was a takedown, strikes, body work, ground. It if you haven't seen that, go back and watch it. One of the most beautiful finishing sequences of all time. So I don't think Volk at this point in his career is interested in any sort of rematches.
Sure.
He's done that enough. The Max Holloway, the Diego Lopez.
The Islam Makhachev.
Yeah, exactly. Now, maybe that's the one exception, but that's, I mean, they're
too far away now.
170 now, but maybe a Topuria. That would be, if Topuria can somehow get the 155 belt, maybe Volk makes a run for that. But
there's too much fun at 155 to be had. And then my thing, which I'll continue saying, screaming from the rooftops on this channel, if Peter Yan wins one more title fight, move him to 45, give him a champ opportunity, and make it against Volkanovski, because stylistically and size-wise, those two pair up so well together. A lot of people say Peter Yan is the most skilled fighter on the UFC roster, and I guarantee most people would say prime Volkanovski was just as good as Peter Yan. And even though he's not quite in the prime years anymore, Volkanovski's still got the fight IQ to deal with a world champion. And Peter Yan versus Volk is the fight that I want to see him actually retire with.
That'd be a crazy one. Stylistic, I think it'd be fun. I mean, there's videos of them sparring together at Tiger Muay Thai, and Volk was winning the rounds, but that was years ago.
Yeah.
Peter was not in his full prime, and Volk was, and now Volk's kind of out of his top prime, but
we're in the weeds now.
Still championship material. So that's a fun fight. Last thing I want to talk about today, William Zepeda. This guy is an absolute volume machine. Lamont Roach Jr. had zero answer for the volume, the tenacity, and the in-your-face style of William Zepeda last night. I was so impressed with this young man's ability to just keep a pace and pressure for 12 full rounds. I know he has the one loss to Shakur Stevenson, but that shows you how good Shakur is. But Zepeda is a star. If he doesn't run into Shakur again, he may never lose again in his career.
Yeah. So William Zepeda is absolutely lights out and must see TV. His striking ability, the way he comes across the ring and just shows no respect to his opponents. And Lamont Roach is the kind of guy you need to respect.
A lot of people thought he beat Tank.
Yeah, exactly. Great fight with Tank. Now he's coming off of 2 draws, so mentally I wasn't sure where Lamont Roach would be, and it seemed to me like he was a little bit of a shell of himself. Boxing is sort of screwed up ever since Floyd Mayweather went 50-0, and the new narrative with boxing is you have to be undefeated. As soon as you lose that you're a bum. You're a bum, and they kind of throw you to the wayside, and then they try to build the next guy who's undefeated. I think it's much better when you get guys who have lost, who have had draws, and things like that, and just let them keep growing their name and stardom. But William Zepeda might not be known by that many people, especially here on this channel that watch MMA mostly, but you have to tune in for this guy, an unorthodox, high volume, high octane southpaw that gets in your face from the very opening bell to the very final second of the fight. And Lamont Roach, like I said, very high level boxer, but he had no answers, and it looked like he had basically packed up and decided mentally he was heading home halfway through that fight. And the American style boxing is that of, I'm going to make you miss so much, and I'm going to counter and make it look real pretty. You're going to start walking into my traps. You're going to get hit by a bunch of stuff coming in. He had a little bit of that in the beginning. First couple rounds, he landed some nice check hooks. He was able to find his footing and do a decent job as Zepeda was trying to close the distance and get a read on what was going to come his way. But every time after about the 3rd or 4th round that a check hook came his way, or a shot, or an overextended 2 came his way from Lamont Roach, he would land an additional exchange at the end of the combination, or an additional combo at the end of the exchange, and he was getting the better of all of those opportunities. And that's why you saw Lamont Roach, instead of doing what you would have to do when you're down on a scorecard, which is get aggressive, get tenacious, be more risky, take more risks, and go out there and try to get the fight won, he was just trying to make Zepeda miss, and somehow Zepeda was just able to turn into this storm that got bigger and bigger and more impressive as the fight went on. So enough good things can't be said about him. I really think that after that performance, we need to be talking about him with some of the bigger names in boxing right now, anywhere from 135 to 140, because what he did was nothing short of spectacular, and he was the underdog going into that fight, and the lines very quickly shifted on that. And after about round 3, here on Call Sheet, when I was watching it, it went from about 45%, 55%, and then stayed there for a couple rounds. And then after about round 3, boom, it went to 97%. Everybody saw the writing on the wall. There was no chance Lamont Roach was going to risk any sort of.
He didn't want to be knocked out.
Exactly.
That was the thing. He was content losing the decision. He thought, maybe I can catch catch him with a count or something. But Lamont Roach doesn't really have that much power, right? 25 wins and 10 knockouts compared to Zepeda's 30 wins and now 31 wins and 27 knockouts. So, you don't want to play that game with William Zepeda either. Lamont Roach just really had nothing for him. And that's why when you saw those lines move on Kalshi, where he was the slight underdog to 97% chance of victory, and it stayed there from rounds 3 to 12. I mean, it was just clear as day the way that fight was going. So I feel like even though, we had a lot of MMA to talk about today, we would be remiss if we didn't mention the spectacular boxing performance of William Zepeda last night.
Yeah, his footwork was on display. He was real sharp with his hands. He was mixing up the targets well. He'd go to the body when he needed to. He would have Lamont Roach drop his guard a little bit, then he'd come up top. And then when Lamont went into a high guard situation, he was still able to sneak those hooks around and hit the side of the head. Now, Lamont is very game. He's very durable. He knows how to take a shot, but he had no answers for Zepeda, and Zepeda just walked through him. I can't wait to see what he does next. And Golden Boy promotion obviously needs another star. Obviously, Ryan Garcia and Oscar De La Hoya have their beef, so we don't really know how close those two are going to remain for the future.
I think not very.
Not very, especially with Zuffa now doing the Conor Benn and Ryan Garcia fight. But maybe he should attach his trailer to the Zepeda hitch, because that's a very good fighter who I think, with the fight style that he has, could amass a whole lot of fans and get a whole lot of attention on his fights.
Totally agree. Guys, that pretty much wraps it up for today. Thank you so much for watching this episode. We sincerely appreciate it. And if you haven't smashed that subscribe button yet, absolutely annihilate it and leave an empty crater where that subscribe button used to be. It helps us out tremendously, and it costs you nothing. And you won't miss a video when we drop it. So until next time, have a wonderful day, and we'll see you later.
Peace.